Lieutenant Jake Morrison had 3 rules for surviving diplomatic assignments. Stay professional, keep your opinions internal, and never, ever let the Kaelith see you sweat. The third rule was hardest, because Commander Syria Venn seemed designed specifically to make him forget the other 2. The Meridian's promise hummed through. Slip space, carrying both human and Kaelith delegations toward what everyone hoped would be a breakthrough in relations. Jake's job as cultural liaison sounded important in briefings, but mostly meant preventing humans from accidentally insulting one of the galaxy's most powerful species through ignorance of their approximately 7,000 social protocols. The Kaelith were beautiful in an intimidating way, tall, elegant, with those long ears that expressed emotions their perfectly controlled faces never revealed. Syria was all of that intensified. Elite guard, decorated warrior, strategic genius, and someone so controlled that Jake had never seen her express anything beyond professional courtesy in 3 months of working together. He told himself his awareness of her was professional. He was lying. She moved through the ship's diplomatic spaces like gravity made exceptions for her, amber eyes tracking everything, long ears perfectly still no matter the chaos. During negotiations, while human diplomats sweated over every word, Syria simply existed, competent, controlled, unreachable. Jake had learned Kaelith cultural norms inside and out. He knew the ear positions for respect, curiosity, offense. He knew their emotional control wasn't personality but training, that showing feelings publicly was considered weakness in their society. He knew pursuing personal interest in a Kaelith colleague was inappropriate on approximately 17 different levels. None of that knowledge stopped him from noticing the way starlight caught in her dark hair, or the precise economy of her movements, or the rare moments when her ears would angle forward slightly during their planning sessions. The closest thing to enthusiasm Kaelith warriors allowed themselves. It was fine. He was fine. Professional distance was easy when you spent every waking moment maintaining it. At least, that's what Jake told himself right up until the cultural exchange dinner when everything went catastrophically, impossibly wrong. The dinner was supposed to be informal, building bridges through shared experience, the diplomatic brief called it. Both delegations gathered in the observation lounge, where stars streaked past like captured light. Kaelith's ceremonial drinks flowed more freely than usual, and Jake's exhaustion from weeks of constant diplomatic tension had lowered his guard just enough to be dangerous. Syria stood by the viewport, discussing fleet logistics with a Kaelith colonel. Starlight silhouetted her profile, and Jake's tired brain made a catastrophic error. It forgot to keep his thoughts internal. "God, I want you," he muttered under his breath, so quietly he barely heard himself. But Kaelith hearing was significantly better than human, and those long, elegant ears weren't just decorative. Syria's ears snapped to attention, the Kaelith equivalent of whipping your head around in shock. Conversation didn't stop immediately, but it stuttered, faltered. Other Kaelith turned, their ears angling forward in expressions Jake's training identified as scandal mixed with fascination. Jake's brain caught up approximately 3 seconds too late. Horror flooded through him as he realized every Kaelith in the room had heard his whispered confession. The human diplomats looked ready to throw him out an airlock. The Kaelith delegation erupted into rapid melodic conversation that Jake's translator struggled to follow. But Syria just stared at him, her amber eyes wide, her ears trembling with something Jake couldn't identify. Not anger exactly, not disgust, something else that made his chest tight with fear and hope in equal measure. Then she moved with that perfect military precision, excused herself in flawless diplomatic language, and left the observation lounge without another word. Her silence was somehow louder than any response could have been. The room exploded into controlled chaos. Jake sat frozen while his career dissolved in real time, thinking that of all the ways to destroy human-Kaelith relations, accidentally confessing forbidden attraction to an elite warrior in front of both delegations had to rank in the top 5 stupidest possible moves. His communicator lit up with emergency meeting summons. This was bad. This was career-ending bad. This was potentially alliance-destroying bad. But somewhere in his panicking mind, Jake noticed something strange. Syria's ears, in that moment before she left, hadn't been flat with anger or rigid with offense. They'd been trembling, uncertain, expressing an emotion he'd never seen from her before, and he had no idea what it meant. The emergency meeting was exactly as horrible as expected. Jake's superiors cycled through fury, panic, and contingency planning, while he sat there accepting that his diplomatic career was over before it really began. The Kaelith delegation had requested a formal audience, and nobody knew if they were about to demand his removal, file official complaints, or void the alliance entirely due to his inappropriate conduct. Jake prepared for the worst. He got something completely different. When the formal audience convened, both delegations present, every word recorded for official records. It wasn't the Kaelith commander who spoke first. It was Syria. She stood before the assembly in full military regalia, her long ears held in the formal position for important declarations. When she spoke, her voice carried the same control Jake had heard 100 times, but underneath it something raw pushed through. I must address Lieutenant Morrison's statement from last evening. Every eye turned to Jake, who wished desperately for the floor to open up. In Kaelith culture, we prize emotional control above nearly all else. From childhood, we're trained to suppress feelings, to maintain composure, to never allow personal desires to influence our actions. This discipline has served us well in war and politics. Her ears shifted slightly, a position Jake didn't recognize. But it has also isolated us. We cannot form genuine bonds with other species when we hide everything that makes connections possible. For months, I have worked with Lieutenant Morrison, maintaining perfect professional distance while privately struggling with feelings our culture teaches are dangerous and inappropriate. Jake's heart stopped. Syria continued, her voice steady despite the bomb she was dropping. His confession last night, undiplomatic, unprofessional by every standard, was also the most honest emotional statement I've encountered in my entire career. In my culture, such honesty is forbidden, but perhaps that's the problem. She turned to face the Kaelith commander directly. I request permission to pursue a personal connection with the human liaison, acknowledging this violates cultural norms. But those norms have left us unable to build real alliances. If we want genuine cooperation with humanity, we must accept their emotional honesty, even when it makes us uncomfortable. The Kaelith delegation erupted. Older members expressed outrage through rapid ear movements and sharp melodic protests. Younger Kaelith remained silent, but their ears angled forward with what looked like cautious support. Jake sat paralyzed, watching Syria risk her career and reputation to defend his stupid, whispered confession. Watching her argue that maybe, just maybe, the walls Kaelith culture built around emotions had become prisons instead of protection. The human delegation looked equally shocked, but for different reasons. This wasn't just about Jake and Syria anymore. This was about whether two species could find common ground when their approaches to emotion were fundamentally opposed. The debate lasted hours, and when it finally concluded, nothing was resolved, but nothing was destroyed either. Just space opened for something new to begin. The controversy exploded across star systems. Conservative Kaelith factions called Syria a traitor to their emotional discipline, proof that human influence corrupted their carefully maintained culture. They demanded her recall, her public censure, examples made of warriors who prioritized personal feelings over duty. On the human side, reactions split between celebration, finally, real cultural exchange, and concern about personal relationships complicating professional alliances. Xenodiplomatic analysts dissected every aspect of Jake and Syria's situation in broadcasts that reached dozens of worlds. But Syria refused to back down. She made her case publicly in an address that was broadcast to the Kaelith homeworld. Our emotional suppression was survival strategy during the unification wars. But those wars ended 3 centuries ago. We've worn protective armor so long we've forgotten we're still wearing it, and it's become a cage. Her long ears, visible on every screen, expressed emotions as she spoke, something no high-ranking Kaelith had done publicly in living memory. Lieutenant Morrison's confession was inappropriate by every diplomatic measure, but it was honest. And honesty, emotional truth, is something our culture has systematically destroyed in favor of control and appearances. She challenged her own people. If we want real alliances, we must accept that other species express feelings openly. We must learn to meet them there, not demand they adopt our emotional silence. Otherwise, we'll remain isolated behind walls we've built ourselves. The speech resonated with younger Kaelith, who'd felt the crushing weight of constant control, who'd watched other species form deep bonds while they remained emotionally distant even from family. Public opinion began shifting, not universally, but enough to create pressure on the high command. The compromise came weeks later. Syria wouldn't be recalled, but her relationship with Jake would be observed as cultural experiment. Clinical language for letting them try while both governments watched nervously. Jake and Syria accepted immediately, because the alternative was separation, and neither was willing to lose what had accidentally begun. Their first official date, supervised by nobody but watched by millions through news coverage, was awkward, complicated, and genuine. They met in a neutral garden habitat, where earth flowers grew beside Kaelith bioluminescent plants that chimed softly. "I grew up learning to hide everything," Syria said, her long ears expressing vulnerability Jake had never seen from her. "Joy, fear, love, all considered weaknesses. My mother never told my father she loved him, even on her deathbed. It would have been inappropriate." Jake reached for her hand carefully, aware they were probably being recorded. "Humans are the opposite. We're emotional disasters constantly. We cry at sad movies, laugh too loud, fall in love stupidly. It's messy. It's honest," Syria countered. Her ears angled forward, contentment he'd learned. "When you whispered that you wanted me, I was terrified. Not because it was inappropriate, but because I wanted to say it back, and I'd spent my entire life learning that such feelings were dangerous." "Are they?" Jake asked. "Dangerous?" Syria's laugh surprised them both, full, unguarded, her ears expressing pure joy in a way that would have scandalized Kaelith conservatives. "Absolutely, but perhaps the right kind of dangerous. The kind that leads somewhere better. They didn't solve everything. Cultural differences don't vanish because 2 people want them to. But they started a conversation their species needed, built on Jake's whispered confession and Syria's courage to admit she felt the same. Months later, when the Kaelith High Command officially recognized their relationship as legitimate cultural exchange, Syria did something revolutionary. She kissed him in public, her long ears expressing unguarded happiness, and Jake realized this. Her genuine emotion, freely shown, was worth every awkward moment, every political complication, every risk. Their story became the Syria Venn incident in xenodiplomatic academies, taught as both cautionary tale and example of how authentic emotion can bridge impossible divides. And Jake, whose whispered confession nearly destroyed his career, learned that sometimes the worst mistakes open doors nobody knew existed. On the other side, something beautiful, complicated, and absolutely worth fighting for. In the garden habitat where they first officially met, under stars that belonged to both their worlds, Syria whispered back the words that started everything. "I want you too. I always have." Her long ears trembled with emotion she'd spent a lifetime learning to hide, now freely expressed. Jake pulled her closer, thinking about the cultural exchange dinner where everything went wrong, or maybe, impossibly, right. "We're going to be a case study," he said, half laughing. "Students will analyze every stupid thing I said." "Good." Syria's amber eyes reflected bioluminescent flowers. "Let them learn that honesty, even clumsy, inappropriate honesty, matters more than perfect protocol. Let them see that emotions aren't weaknesses to suppress but bridges to build." Around them, the garden sang with wind through crystal leaves. Somewhere, diplomats were still debating the implications of their relationship. Somewhere, conservative factions were still protesting. But here, now, two people from radically different cultures had found something neither expected: acceptance not despite their differences, but because of them. Jake's whispered confession had been accidental, inappropriate, and the best mistake he'd ever made. Because Syria, controlled, disciplined, unreachable Syria, had heard it and decided that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding behind centuries of emotional armor. "I can't hold back anymore," Syria whispered, echoing the feelings she'd suppressed for months. "I don't want to, not with you." And Jake, whose job was facilitating cultural exchange, realized they'd just facilitated the most important exchange of all. Two hearts learning to speak each other's language, one honest moment at a time. Years later, when their partnership had become the foundation for deeper human Kaelith cooperation, when younger Kaelith pointed to Syria as proof that emotional honesty didn't mean losing discipline, when Jake taught at the Xeno-Diplomatic Academy about the night everything changed, they still returned to that garden habitat, still stood among flowers from two worlds, remembering the whispered confession that shouldn't have worked but did. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply being honest about what you feel. And sometimes, against all diplomatic protocol, cultural norms, and reasonable expectations, that honesty changes everything.